So one of the nice things about awakening is that that need to be in opposition to reality, to define yourself, becomes less and less, and ultimately disappears, because what's the point in fighting reality? You know, it just brings pain and suffering and conflict, and things that might be entertaining for some number of eons, but eventually you get tired of it. It's time to just move on into something more peaceful and more joyful. And that isn't something that you can decide on. You can't decide, I'm going to be awake now, and then just like that, be awake, because the ego can't decide to awaken itself. The ego can't even decide, it can't decide anything. The only thing that's choosing is that spark of divinity that's within all of us, that is just the one divinity. And so it's the one making the choice. And if the one through you decides that it wants to awaken, it will start that process. And next time we'll talk more about what some practices are, like what can you do if you do feel that call to move towards awakening, and eventually get to the point where something tips and flips the script, and then that I consciousness, that I sense drops away. So the second part of what I wanted to discuss here is this gets a little bit technical, but there is a sort of a map of awakening, or the process of awakening. It's not just this willy-nilly thing where one day you're in dreaming human consciousness and the next day you're not, and it's just just a fluke, or just a shift in how you're thinking about things on a mental level. It's a very deep shift that happens, and it's not something that happens overnight. And basically what it looks like is that the sense of I energetically rests in the heart. If you have a sense of the chakras, it sits in the heart chakra. And we can think of it as a veil, in the sense that, a veil is something that separates. If you have a partition in a room, that partition creates the sense of separateness, of some, being on one side or being on the other side, but it's still just one room. And so you can think of the sense of I as being this veil that creates I'm me here, and everybody and everything else is out there. And so there is this separation, and the I is what creates that separation. And so there's this veil in the heart that's generating this sense of I. And that veil is supported by all kinds of separation consciousness. And that exists throughout the entire body mind. What is most important in terms of this path of going from wherever you're at to losing that core veil, you have to start with something called karma knots. So I know I'm kind of throwing a lot of information at you, so I don't want to go, I want to take my time with it. So separation consciousness is what fuels that sense of I, and one of the most intense drivers of that separation consciousness is a karma knot. And so that's karma, like the idea of what goes around comes around, knot, like tying a knot. But in this case, we're not talking about the karma of events, we're talking about the karma of conditioning. Karma means cause and effect. And so if you are mean to somebody, then that's a cause, and the effect will be, it eventually comes back to you. Internal karma, the karma of conditioning, is where something that happened in your past continues to affect you in your present and your future. So there's a cause in the past, and that has an effect moving forward in through time, until eventually you let go of that conditioning. So there's this separation consciousness in the center of the spine called karma knots. And you can have anywhere from 1 karma knot or 0 karma knots up to many hundreds or even thousands of karma knots. And each one is the source of really densified separation and suffering. and will be at the center of a particular karmic or emotional issue. So, any pattern of anger that you have, or fear, jealousy, depression, codependence, addiction, self-worth, uh, even being closed off from emotions, all these different issues and patterns that we have at the core of it somewhere one of these knots. And I think the average person walking down the street has 243 of these karma knots. The most I've ever heard of, one of our presidents had 2,000 karma knots. And most people who wind up on this spiritual path will have fewer than 50 karma knots. You have to kind of get to a certain place in your process before something like going to an awakened teacher or what have you would even resonate and be something that you would want to pursue. So each one of these karma knots is generating all this separation consciousness at the core of our being in the spine, and they sort of exist in sort of like a string of pearls. And so really the first step towards awakening is releasing these karma knots. And there's lots of different ways to do that. Again, we'll get more into that in the call on Wednesday. But ultimately, it's about bridging divine consciousness, awake, whole, free consciousness into the core of that karma knot. So, just like Martin Luther King Jr. said, you don't defeat hate with more hate. You can only defeat hate with love. Similarly, you can't get rid of a karma knot by hating on it or judging it or fighting it or trying to destroy it. Like, all of that is just separation consciousness being poured on top of separation consciousness. If you want to release a karma knot, you have to find a way to bridge in consciousness that is not in separation. And of course, we are all expressions of divinity. We are all divinity itself. And so if you can bring your own awareness without any sort of struggle into the center of a karma knot, it will release. And so this is why we meditate. This is why so much Buddhist practice is around sitting and just being present. That presence, as you allow that to sort of the volume of presence to be turned up, that means that the volume of the noise gets turned down. And the more of that presence you have sort of turned up in your system, the easier it is for that to bridge into that separation and that maelstrom of conflict or of suffering in your system. And so then karma knots start dropping away. Once you get to the last karma knot, once that releases, then there's a sense of freedom that emerges in the sort of core of your being. And so then you're in a little bit of a no man's land. You're in this place where separation is no longer at the very core of your being, and yet you have not awakened yet. You don't know what you are yet. You just don't know what you aren't. Similar to when the sense of I drops away. That's another point where you recognize, oh, I wasn't all those things, but what am I? Well, that takes a little bit longer to get to. But once that last karma knot goes, once that sense of separation at the core of your body-mind is gone, then there's sort of some freedom without quite knowing where all of it's going. And then eventually there's another energetic shift in your consciousness that emerges in the heart chakra, where divinity, a certain aspect of divinity, emerges in the heart. And that's sort of the first permanent taste of awakening. So when divinity emerges in the heart. And for me, when I had that experience, it was like, I just noticed that my heart kind of felt like it was smiling all the time. It wasn't this big to do. It was just like, just, that was chill, it's good. And so then that happens in other parts of the energy system. So it happens in the sixth chakra, which is right through the brow, the crown chakra through the top of the head. Each of these are very distinct energetic shifts in consciousness. And from there, there's more of these energetic shifts, and it gets a little bit detailed, and there's some jargon involved in all of it. But basically what's happening is that you have these energetic shifts that break down the ego's sense of what it thought it was, and helps it to, helps consciousness, helps, what you really are start to recognize its own self. And this happens in roughly 14 distinct steps. Losing the last karma knot is the fourth of these 14 steps. The 13th step is very wow. That's where you're sort of sitting in consciousness between the unmanifest and the manifest, and you're just in kind of awe and wonder at the magnificence of it all. And that feels really good. And a lot of people, would probably prefer to just hang out in this like really wow, jazzy, cool kind of place to be with awakening. But that's not it. Anything that's sort of wow is making sort of a judgment and assessment of divinity, whereas divinity just is, And so then that 14th energetic shift is where this permanent hole appears in the center of that core veil. And then it just feels, everything comes back to being ordinary again. And there's even, for some people, a sense of ordinariness as an experience and as a sensation that just kind of takes everything over. It's just like, God, everything's just so ordinary. And not in a bad way, like in just I don't have to, go to the extreme ends of judgment around things being great or being terrible. Everything just sort of is what it is. It's ordinary. And that 14th shift in consciousness, where you have that permanent window, little peephole in the center of your core veil, that's the last specific energetic shift that's needed for awakening. Once you have that little hole in your core veil and that place where there is no I sense, then that can start to expand, and that can start to break down the rest of that core veil. And then eventually when that happens, there's just beingness. And for some people, laughter. So when I had my awakening experience, I was in a workshop with my teacher, and it was designed specifically to facilitate awakening. And he had us do this meditation where we imagined that we were looking at a mirror, and looking in the mirror with your eyes closed, but in the mind's eye, you're looking at a mirror, looking at your own eyes and tracking from the eyes down the spine to the heart, and then just seeing what you find there. And so I was doing this meditation along with the rest of the class, and I had gotten to a very sort of clear place. I was in a much more surrendered place than I had ever been in my life before. But there was still a thread of that core veil still there. And I'm sitting there meditating, trying to get it right. I got to get this right. Come on. It's not that hard. Just look at your own eyes. Find the truth inside there. And as much as I was trying not to effort and try and, do all the things you're not supposed to do, I was doing them. Just at maybe a lower level than I might have done, say 5 years before that. And when we came out of the meditation, when it was time to share, I kind of timidly raised my hand. I wasn't quite sure if I had anything worth sharing or not. But my teacher looked over at me, and he said, Nathan, I was watching you throughout the meditation, and you're in so much drama. It's like you had painted yourself into a corner. And I just wanted to come up to you and say, boo. And in that moment, something shifted. I didn't know exactly what had shifted. It felt very subtle in the moment, but there was something there. And all of a sudden he's talking to the rest of the class about my awakening as if he was talking about the contents of a test tube. It was like, hey, everybody, look what happened over here. The experiment worked. And I'm like, wait, are you saying that it happened? Like, did I lose my core veil? And he looked over at me, like kind of surprised by the question. He's like, oh yeah. I was like, okay, great. Now I can go to the bathroom. So I did. I got up and went to the bathroom. And this was kind of a key moment for me because, as insightful and intuitive as my teacher is, it seemed to me that, being awake was a personal experience. I didn't want it to just be on his say-so that I was supposedly awake. And so I went into a bit of inquiry, like I'd been doing for years at that point, diving into the question of who am I? And for years, when I asked that question, there was a very clear sense that came out. I am I. I am me. I am this. I am Nathan. Or just a sense of I, not even any words attached to it. But if I asked, who am I? That word I would refer to that I sense, and I would know exactly what that felt like again. So what would it mean if I did this inquiry once my core veil supposedly wasn't there anymore? So I'm in the bathroom, I've done my business, and I didn't want to disturb anybody. So I do this inquiry before I come back out, and I ask myself, who am I? And at first there was just emptiness. I asked the question, it's like it landed in a still pond that didn't ripple. Who am I? Just peace. And then somewhere in there, when I was sort of trying to track it, trying to find something, and all I was finding was emptiness. And so I'm tracking it, and there's all this stillness and all this emptiness, and then there's laughter. Something in me that knows, the truth of all of this. We all are that divinity that created the cosmos. So whatever that is, it's like asking the question was hilarious. Who am I? Like, what does that even mean? Like, that's an absurd question on its face. Once you are coming from a place of awakeness where, there is no such thing as an I. So what is this question you're asking yourself? It's absurd. And so that to me was the indication, okay, something fundamentally did shift. I've never experienced that. I never experienced asking, who am I? And finding not only emptiness, but then just sort of this knowing laughter. So this form is finally in on the joke. It took a while, pretty dense in here. You had to keep knocking on it a bunch of times in order to dislodge me from my false identity, but it did finally happen. So that's how, for me, the confluence of this understanding of the energetic components of what awakening is came together with my personal experience. And in that moment, it was very clear, yes, there is something different happening now to what was happening for my entire life up until this point. And they say that, you can have a satori, you can have a moment of awakening, and that is very helpful and can be very blissful, but that isn't awakening, because for every leaving, there's a returning. If you're still in the world of duality, you can go out into this experience of satori, but you're eventually going to come back. And a true awakening is one that is abiding. That's the word they often use, this abiding sense of awakeness that doesn't come and go, it's just always there. And this experience that I had where the core veil dropped away was back in 2006. So 14, 15 years ago. And that sense of I has never come back. And in fact, as I've delved deeper and deeper, just more and more of that sort of shadow I, all this conditioned I stuff, continue to drop away. And as you go through this process, you do find more veils. There are other veils of identity. And there's even something called an I point, which is something that even viruses have. There's quintillions of viruses out there, and all of them have a little I point for survival, and it's wrapped up in survival and reproduction. That's basically all it is. But it's very important to the virus to do that because it has that I point. It has that sense of being an I, being an ego that wants to live and wants to reproduce and wants to, sort of be immortal in that way. So anything that's living in the cosmos has that I point if it's, in the dreaming state. And so that can be awakened as well. your identity with the cosmic I, the entire cosmos, the manifest universe, has a sense of identity to it. And we as individual forms have our own, we sort of borrow from that sense of identity and have our own sense of I around being the universe. And so then that drops away. And it keeps going like that. And eventually you get to the point where you awaken to divinity itself. All these awakenings help create an alignment with awake consciousness and with what it is to not live in I. But divinity is still a bit of a mystery. You sort of look at divinity and the only word that you can use to accurately describe it is mystery. And then there comes a point where you tip over into where that mystery is just what you are. And so then you might not be able to articulate with words what it is, but it becomes known as an experience of having awakened to that level of divinity. So then that becomes the beginning of the next journey. So this just keeps going on and on. There is no end point. I hope nobody feels disappointed by that there isn't a finish line. Certainly losing the core veil is a very sort of key moment in that whole process. But that isn't the end of it. And anybody who is in human form will never get to the end of that process. And that's actually quite beautiful, because then whatever it is that you're experiencing is a deepening into the great truth and the great reality that we all are. And we get to have that experience. That's part of why this whole cosmos was created, was to have experience. And so to be able to move from this very dense I consciousness out of that and more and more and more into the unfathomable depths of divinity is just a never-ending process. And personally, I would have it no other way, because then there's just always something new to discover and some new aspect of the reality that we all are that I can learn about and connect with and align with and delight in how that manifests in our daily lives, in my daily life, and those that are in my life. So that's it in a nutshell. I feel like I've bombarded you guys with a lot of technical information. Yes, no beginning, no end. And so at this point, I'll be quiet and open up the floor to the rest of you. And just kind of curious what your thoughts and feelings are on everything that I've described here. So, yes, Anne, go for it.
I remember being on a substance on a journey once upon a time, a few years ago, and that was the thing that just jumped out at me, and it was like, oh wow, there's no end. It was just like, oh my God. I always had this sense of that you get to the finish line until that moment. And I was like, oh. So it really hit me. So that part of what you just said wasn't a surprise, because I've experienced it, but just not in my normal consciousness. But I do have the memory of experiencing that. Couldn't tell you exactly how I knew or anything, but that was very profound for me. And it was kind of scary, but beautiful at the same time. Right. I mean, I always kind of part of me wanted life to be just kind of like a cozy little box that you kind of get into. But then I was like, well, what would be on the outside of the box? There must be something out there. Life isn't just what's in the box, right. Even though part of me wants to just crawl in, and be cozy. But yeah, so yeah, I was just reminded of that. And
yeah, that's a very, very common sort of thought or belief or projection that we have because we feel so unsafe, and we just want to feel safe. We want to get to that destination where we don't have to deal with with all the fear and all the anxiety and all the uncertainty and so forth. And so we project that there's some place in the future that we can get to where there will be a box that we can live in in that place we'll feel cozy and safe and so forth. And it turns out that you're actually already safe. What we are is indestructible. And there is no need for a conditioned form of safety. That box, that cozy box, is sort of this conditioned place where if you're in the box, you feel safe. If you're outside of the box, you don't feel safe. And we just want to be inside that box. And it turns out that whether you're inside the box or outside of the box, you're always eternal and indestructible. And even if you don't have that, that you can think of that as maybe being a story of being indestructible. But even if you don't have that, if you awaken out of the story of being not safe, then whether you are in the box or outside of the box, the question of safety disappears. It doesn't matter. It doesn't even come up whether you're safe or not. You just are where you are, and you can rest in being in that place. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts or questions from anybody? It's actually, I don't want to put you on the spot too much, Judy, but I was curious. We talked a little bit before the call or before the meditation started about sort of the different opinions and different things that you've learned about awakening from different perspectives. I was just kind of curious how all this landed for you today.
Just listening to you made me think of a lot of things. I just made some notes as those thoughts came up. But one of them was, and I won't remember exactly what you said, but who am I? Who am I not? The whole journey, I used to see awakening as just levels of remembering who you are and who you're not. And then it's like the heart, you said about being driven. The heart is driving you because at the core, you just know there's more, right? And so you're like you said, you're being driven. I totally agree with everything you said. Not that it's about agreeing or not, but I love listening to someone sharing similar, but in different words. You know what I mean? Like using different words. So that's pretty cool. And the whole thing was awesome. But one thing, like you made me think of who forget the word you said. I'm pure. I'm on manifest pure creator consciousness, right? Which you can use a lot of different words. This is the whole thing about words and labels, and you can use many words for the same thing. And we're just emanating in and throughout.
So say again, we're just what?
Emanating.
Emanating?
We're love and light.
Love and light.
Breath. That's who I am. Infinity, if you want to call it. No beginning, no end.
Right.
And I'm coming in the physical body and I'm going out. I wish I'd have known that 50 years ago.
I know, there's so many things. If I'd only knew then what I know now.
Every breath I take in now is almost like an enlightening. You know what I mean? Once you feel your presence at the beginning of the meditation, once you connect to that, you just don't want to let it go away.
Yeah.
You don't want to ever lose it. You just want to expand more and more and more within it. And so anyways.
Lovely. No, thank you. That's really quite lovely. And I appreciate your sharing that. And there is a beauty to the process, it being whatever it is, being unending. There's such a beauty to that. And there's also just something really lovely about being able to get different perspectives on that, and how that will inform your own perspective. And sometimes just a little shift in perspective can make such a big difference. And that's a big part of why I started doing these calls, is because over and over again I've been able to really help people shift their perspective in a way that radically changed their life. And there's just something so beautiful and magical about that, that I just want to keep doing that. So that's why we're here.
I found it interesting. You said, what was the expression, your last, or what did you call that, karmic knot?
Right.
Can a person actually know that the karma's, like, I thought this was a forever ending, will we get to the end of our karma this lifetime type thing?
So right. So there's a difference between the karma knot. What that's pointing to is the karma of conditioning. And that's something that we can do something about. Every time you let go of an old pattern or an old identity, or just kind of grow in some way, that is shifting out of the karma of conditioning. And that's, people are doing that every day. The karma of events, I'm not free of that. Let's just be clear. That's still playing out. And will continue to do so until, some point in the future. I have no idea. I don't really concern myself with that too much, because there's nothing I can do about it. I just surrender to whenever karma comes back to me. I just surrender. It's like, okay, well, this is what it, in order to be free, all the karma that I've put out into the cosmos has to balance out. It's just balancing the books. And so I don't have very much choice around that. And so I just, live my life normally. And if some bit of karma comes my way, then I surrender to that and embrace it as much as I can. I have found in my perspective that when karma does come back to me, divinity finds a way to do it in a very loving way. It's not a punishment. We tend to think of it as a, divine retribution because of our, some of our cultural upbringing. But to my perception and experience, when we get hit with karma, it isn't a punishment. It is an act of love, so that you can come into a deeper place of freedom. And divinity finds a way to manifest that karma in a way that helps you to grow and evolve, and to come out of your own false identities and your own suffering. So our negative karma, quote unquote negative, divinity uses in a very loving way that helps us to evolve and to come out of our suffering. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there, because there is a lot of misconception around karma. So for me, it's not punishment. And then when I was talking about having lost my last karma knot, I wasn't saying that I don't have any karma left to play out and to have to expiate. Just that that particular flavor of conditioning in my system resolved. And that is absolutely possible for people to do on their own. Okay. Well, it has been a lovely hour spending with the rest of you, with all of you. And if there are any last minute questions, feel free to pipe in right now. Otherwise, I will just thank you again all for showing up, not just for me, but for yourself in your process. Once again, thank you so much for showing up. And if you have any questions later on, feel free to reach out to me. And otherwise, I wish you all a beautiful day.
Thank you. Namaste.
Namaste.